This is the voice of Bold Business Radio, and I am your host, Jessica Dewell of Red Direction. You're listening to Program 64, Disruption. Today, when you listen to the show with Shane Sturgeon and Palma Michel, it's not going to end up the way that you think. We are looking at disruption not as this new trendy thing that occurs, but this thing that happens all the time through evolution and change. And it's our willingness to be open about it that gives us the advantage. And if we're not, puts us at a disadvantage. There's a place for dreaming. There's a place for thinking really big and unexpected, and how that fits into what we want our strategy to be, how that fits into the connections and the relationships that we make. So keep that in mind. And ultimately, disruption is we're out of our comfort zone. We're out of our comfort zone unexpectedly. We became complacent. We forgot what it was like to be hungry. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves at a place of survival, and then we're in this place of disruption, and then it is only then we're usually willing to step out, to try something new, to take a chance. This conversation really is about how do we take those chances every day in our lives, at our work, in our homes, so that we can continue to learn and remain relevant and lead well. I'm going to introduce you now to Shane Sturgeon, who leads and manages operational and cross-functional project teams in the field of information technology, financial services and systems, and human resources. And Palma Michel is a sought-after public speaker, mindfulness teacher, coach, and author of The Authority Guide to Mindful Leadership. Both of our panelists today answer the question, how do you suggest that companies look for what will be the next big shakeup in their industry?
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
All right, Shane, we want to know, Shane Sturgeon, how do you suggest that companies look for what will be the next big shakeup in their industry?
Right. Well, I think the obvious things are the things that you hear from everyone else, which is to undertake regular environmental scans, read the trade papers, etc. But I don't think those actually answer the question, will something be disruptive? And when you think about it, new innovations are everywhere. And even though they may not be innovative and groundbreaking, that doesn't actually make them disruptive. For something to be disruptive, it needs to actually have a material effect on your industry. And the effect on your business might be immediate, delayed, or negligible, depending on how prepared you are. And you need to anticipate both. So you also need to anticipate the effects that the disruptive elements will have on other businesses in your environment and what the chain reaction is going to be. Quite a lot of things you need to be thinking about and looking ahead. So it's quite a bit of analysis you need to be doing. And it comes down to analysing those new innovations and thinking about what I think are three key factors. The first one is you need to look to history. Look back and see what kinds of changes in the past have actually been disruptive, particularly in your industry. The second thing you do is you follow the money. Because some new innovation that threatens to change the world but has no financial impact on your business or industry is not going to be disruptive. So the analysis starts from assessing whether it will substantially decrease your profit. And the ways you look at that are you look at your income. Is the disruptor going to decrease the revenue that's just going to be coming in? So is it something like, for example, constrained government funding, greater number of people competing for the same pie, that sort of thing? Will the disruptor make it harder to generate more revenue? Then you look at the expense side. Is the disruptor going to increase your costs? If it increases your costs, then you either have to reduce your profit or increase your prices. And if you increase your prices, you may lose customers. So will the disruptor decrease the expenses of a competitor relative to you? If so, they gain a competitive advantage. And the third thing, which is generally what I always come back to with everything actually, and that's to focus on the customer, because the customer is why we're there. So the innovation is something which is purchased by a consumer rather than part of your supply chain. An innovative company is going to find ways of solving problems for them that's significantly superior to alternatives. And you need to think about how those customers are going to behave in response to that potential disruptor. That's probably a sort of a good sum up for the start.
You think it was just a good sum up? I think we could stop the show right here.
Oh, excellent. I'm done then, right?
But we're not, because there's more, right? Palma, Michel, we want to hear from you also. How do you suggest that companies look for what's the next big shakeup in their industry?
I think Shane made quite an interesting point here, mentioning the customers at the end. I'd probably add, rather than putting them at the end, I would put the customers in some ways almost at the forefront, because nowadays with social media, the rapid speed of change often comes from the customers, and the more some competitors have heard the customers' needs, that's how businesses like Airbnb were created in the first place, could potentially be where the next shake-up could be coming from. The other thing, maybe in addition, let's say, to trade papers, to government, and to actually looking at your competitors in just your industry, I think in today's environment, we, in addition to that, need to be much, much bolder and look at parallel industries and even maybe absurd industries. Because let's say 10 years ago, it would have been an absurd idea to think that Apple or Amazon is going to be the next financial services company. But that's just what's going to happen today. And that probably not so many people have seen coming a few years back. And then the other thing, given that I'm a mindfulness teacher, I deal a lot with people's minds and people's thought patterns and way of thinking. I think one way to look for disruption or make sure that you really see things is, because it's one thing to study all the papers and do all the, say, classical, logical, analytical stuff. But if you have a boardroom full of people where, let's say, they're all white blokes, aged 55, all have the same opinions, they might see the best data analysis, but they interpret it in a way and they say, well, not really relevant for us, because they can simply maybe not understand some of the trends that come from the more younger or diverse end. So I think really questioning your own thinking, something that I often describe as groupthink, is also really crucial.
I love how you guys played off of each other and you said completely different things, all of which are really relevant. When we think about business and we think about being able to question our own thinking, that's where vulnerability really comes in to the biggest way that we could ever imagine. It is vulnerable to go, maybe we have to change everything we've always done. It is vulnerable to go, maybe we've grown out of our audience or what we thought our audience was. I mean, look at Facebook. Facebook was this amazing, smashing success. And then what happened after 10 years? 10 years, they weren't attracting any new people in their 20s and 30s. They were keeping the people who were now in their 40s and 50s and their 60s and their 70s. So their audience grew with them, but they didn't do anything to stay relevant to that younger audience or go out and attract a different group. And other companies came in different ways that saw how people communicated. And so they're doing different things and they're still being innovative and they're still great at what they do in terms of being a platform for people to connect and do business and all of this other stuff that Facebook provides. It just turns out when they weren't looking, what happened? Their audience grew up and it might not have been what they originally intended. We're not sitting in their boardroom, so we don't know what they're thinking, but we can look on the outside and go, yeah, that happened to them.
Their demographics now grown into the demographic that actually has money to spend, which makes them more to the advertisers. So it could have actually been quite a smart strategy right from the outset. I don't suspect that they were actually thinking about that, but yeah.
I know, right? All we can do is hindsight is 20/20 and think of all the smart things that these people did.
Yeah,
because
they're in a good spot right at the moment.
Exactly. They were just doing what they do. And I actually think, though, sticking with Facebook or with Amazon or with Airbnb, they had a particular mission. And what did they do? They delivered on that mission. What was the company really? Is the company really what they actually are serving, or are they something different? I think about Zappos, which of course Amazon now owns Zappos. Well, Zappos is not a shoe company. Sure, that's the thing they're moving around, but what are they? They are a distribution engine. They have figured out how to get shoes all over the place and this inventory of shoes and move them around. And in fact, Amazon is very similar that way. So even though, they were dealing in different things, it's still all about that mechanism for delivery. And they saw of course, what our habits were, and they were right there at the front. Where are we going? What are the things? And so if we're looking at classical and logical versus questioning our own thinking, let's talk about this element of dreaming. You used the word absurd, Palma. Maybe dreamers and the absurdity really have a place. I'd like to hear you both talk about that a little bit more.
Well, I guess I'm a bit of a dreamer. I've given up my job to go out and start my own business. It's something I've wanted to do for, well, probably 20 or 30 years. It's been one of those goals that I set way back when I was about 19. That's a dream that I've got, and so it's something I want to do. And I think that a lot of startup founders probably have those sort of dreams of going out and trying to make the world a bit of a better place. I think back to the Facebook example you were talking about, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg probably set out to make himself millions and millions of dollars. I don't think that was actually his goal. Doing something that he loved and that he felt really passionate about, and something that I guess was a bit of a dream of his, he's now created one of the largest companies in the world. And I think that's probably how a lot of these large companies actually start, especially in the tech area, actually start out. Because tech people really do it, as being one myself, we do it for the fun and the creative challenge. We don't do it for the money. And I've always believed that with the focus on customers, getting back to what my other panelists said at the start, when you focus on the customer and you try to do something that helps them out, the money follows. Tech people are generally trying to do that. Most of us don't do it particularly successfully, I might add, because being techies, we don't tend to do the obvious things like talk to our customers, which is always
Everybody, Shane hit that one right on the head, and it's true.
It is part of that dream. I guess I'm living proof of trying to follow that dream.
How interesting, Shane. I didn't know that we had these parallels. I also had long-term corporate background before, and I also always dreamed of setting up my own business, but I never knew what it was. Only once I knew what it was and I had my aha moment, I walked towards these dreams. So I think dreaming is really key, and dreaming is particularly also key for companies. It's this, and it's also linking to what Shane said, it's this like a company that has a mission and a purpose. It's really built around something that's different than just producing more money for the shareholders. And when one says mission and purpose, I hope it's often around making the world a better place, but it doesn't even have to be that. But it has to be a clear purpose that serves a need of the customer, of something that hasn't been there, or anticipating what the customer might need, like Steve Jobs did at the time. He wasn't really listening to the customer. He was creating something that we then all wanted so desperately because it was different. And he built another extremely successful business out of it. So I think it's extremely key to, particularly these days, where very often we're so bogged down by some of the things that are happening in the world and the constraints to be bold and to question sort of old assumptions and to really try out new things. And also the more we try new things that seem to be impossible, the more we learn throughout these mistakes and the more we can actually create something really amazing.
Sometimes the right thing is the unpopular thing. Sometimes the dream is something that could be so far outside of the groupthink that we find ourselves really challenged and we end up being on this path of burnout. And so I'm very curious, have you ever been in a situation where you saw something coming and you saw an opportunity, or you saw the need to start questioning and there was so much pushback you gave up?
Perhaps I can talk a little bit about where my previous corporate job, if you like.
Yeah, let's do that.
But one of the things that got it there, it was a university, and universities throughout the world have had issues with funding for some time now. The problem is that funding essentially is constrained, and yet their costs are increasing. And the biggest costs in universities are actually staff, their people costs. So with people's wages go up and they want nicer offices and all that sort of stuff, it all increases the costs. And your students are your customers and they can't afford to pay any money because they haven't got any. You've got the government or other organisations that are paying for those fees and they don't want to pay too much either. So we were in a position where funding had been constrained for quite a long time. And I don't actually think that it was wrong for the funding to be constrained, by the way, but we'll leave that to one side for a minute. And what that did to the university, and it's also doing it to the health sector over here in New Zealand as well, is it's forcing those sectors, if you like, to start to be creative about how they try to survive and deliver services on less money. That is where really got to get quite innovative, looking at things like automation. Some of the things that I was looking at in terms of the changes I was going to make was essentially streamlining and making the staff essentially more productive, looking at how you could strip costs out of the business by looking at how you can do things like bulk buying of resources, things like that. Getting smarter about how you do things, making sure you're not doing things that are actually wasteful and your customers don't actually want. So those are all the sorts of things that you look for in a transformational type change. I think it's those types of changes, they're more step changes rather than incremental. It took the university a long time to get to the point where it needed to do that. Our university resisted it for a long time. And I know that a lot of other universities also resisted it for a long time because, to be honest, the change is unpalatable. It's about probably cutting staff numbers drastically. So it's quite a significant change to the culture. That, I guess, is where severe disruption is going to occur in terms of the staff, the way in which the people that are left work as well. Is that the sort of thing you want to cover off?
Yes. Is there anything you want to add or a story you'd like to share here, Palma?
As a consultant coming into companies when they do go through change processes, or on a weekly basis, I go in to help people to focus better. So everybody, usually you come into a business and people all agree that they don't have enough time and space in their days. They would like to focus better, but then you suggest they stop multitasking and they switch off their email notifications. Whole group of people says, not possible. It's not possible in our organization. Yet at the same time, that would be a very, very simple, very easy, very straightforward suggestion to a lot of their problems. The same starting meditation to learn how to focus better. And again, resistance very often, or people want to do it but don't know how. They cannot just make that behavioral change on a daily basis. So that I'm dealing with pretty much all the time, sort of as an outsider. And then it is my role to sort of have discussions and see really why are people so invested in, for example, not switching off email notifications. So there's always an underlying fear. And then the other thing is, how do you actually support people in making that behavioral change, which takes a lot of sort of neuroscience into consideration, and then practical tips as well, which we might get to later with some of your other questions.
One of the things, Shane, that you brought up, Steve Jobs, right? He was unpopular for a long time because he thought differently. He thought big. And it took a while for his dreams to catch up to the reality because he liked the creative problem solving. He had this thing he was trying to figure out how to create, but he was unpopular. People who come in specifically around change tend to be unpopular. And I think fear is a big, big part of that. One of the things that I wrote down is maybe it's that fear piece that makes it earth-shattering. People fear change, yet when they find themselves in a place of pain, Shane, you mentioned the new creative ways to survive, and it was cost cutting and automation and some things like that. This book comes to mind called The Blue Ocean. You had JetBlue was a result of that, taking this concept of full service and creating something that was self-service and super bargain oriented. And then you've got people like Yellowtail who have mixed and made something that will bring in beer drinkers into the wine world and wine drinkers into the wine world in a cost-effective way. So they're creating their own market. And it takes a lot of thoughtfulness to decide to do something like that, because you're weighing twice everything, right? Twice the possible risks, twice the possible repercussions, twice the things. Yet at the same point in time, there's like this stealthiness where all of a sudden these companies show up and they're like, they're taking my market share. Where did they come from? And that's actually something when we think about business and teams, or it could even be turnover within a team. A business can get obsolete quickly by something as simple as having high turnover or having a lot of error or something like that. I mean, we could name a lot of companies that have lots of errors. But that's not what this is about. They're being disrupted, aren't they? I mean, realistically, they're trying to do what they used to do in this new world by old rules. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would agree with that. And I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but my new business is actually going to create a new market.
Hang on. I'm going to take a station break and then you're going to talk about it. There's no little talk about it at all. So hang on. This is the Voice of Bold Business Radio, and I am your host, Jessica Dewell. Today, you are listening to How We Can Embrace Disruption. And with us are Shane Sturgeon and Palma Michel. Tell us, you're making a new market, Shane?
I am. The product that I'm my corporate job to create is software that enables people to be able to produce budgets and do budget models. One of the things that I learned over 20 years in my previous roles was that a lot of the people that are doing this are not experts, they're not accountants, they don't have lots of highly skilled knowledge in terms of Excel, and yet they need to be doing these kinds of complex models. And software for this does exist, but the software that exists for this is all in the sort of the $100,000 plus bracket. You don't get a lot of it in the $1,000 range. And what I'm really wanting to do is, because I don't actually need the money, I'm doing it for those things we talked about earlier, which is about trying to make the world a better place, trying to actually help people. And so I'm looking to try and bring a top quality enterprise level budget modeling tool down into a price range that enables small business owners to be able to do the kinds of complex models that other businesses do with full-time staff and accountants, being able to do that on their own and do it very simply and easily. And so that's my goal, if you like, in terms of the software that I'm producing.
Wow.
And there isn't a market there for that at that price point. So I'm going to have to create that. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems I've got is that I'm competing with all of the other budget software which is out there. And if you do Google searches for budget software, but if you do, you don't find software that enables you to do budgets. You find cheap software that does pretty much everything. And then if you do happen to find software that is designed for budgeting, it's all based on personal budgeting, envelope type budgeting, where you are taking your income and you are trying to basically break down a set number of categories or jam jars or envelopes, rather than the true budgeting process, which should be aligned to your strategy and which should be focused on the activities you're going to be doing in order to deliver on that strategy. It doesn't come from that end point of here's how much money we've got. It comes from how much money do we need to do in these activities in order to deliver on the strategy. That's a market that I'm trying to actually have to create. It's going to be quite an interesting challenge for me just to create that market as well as creating the product.
Okay, so if I'm a business owner or I'm a department head or I'm in charge of a product in a larger organization and I've got a team, one of my goals must be, how do I keep this product relevant? How do I develop this product? Because I've got people depending on this for their income.
The expert of all the different technologies, but they need to be able to bring the team together, kind of like a conductor in an orchestra. Particularly if there are times of change, it's under pressure, or is worried that they might not be coming up with a product, they might not be able to really hold the space for the team. So as a team leader, I think the first responsibility is really that they learn how to deal with change, with pressure, with demands, in particular learn how to manage their nervous system so that they can remain calm, clear, level-headed, and actually think strategically rather than sort of come from a fear-based type approach. And then it's about orchestrating the teams around that. I think for the last maybe 5 years, collaboration has been a really hot topic. Yet, despite of that, and I even wrote a, I think, 20-page thought leadership study around that, is collaboration. Everybody agrees that it's a must, it's important, but it's so often not very well done. And that's really where a team hand needs to allow the teams to really go away, experiment with different people in the company, experiment really with people outside of the companies. Again, there could be the fear coming in of not allowing that level of innovation coming in from the outside. But also internally, how do you really incentivize people to collaborate with each other and creating really the right circumstances for that? As a team leader, again, it's really important to sort of allow the team to experiment and allow for failure. If they're only interested sort of in the outcome and not in the process, a lot of sort of innovation can get lost along the way. So I'd also encourage an openness and a failure culture and looking at the process rather than just the end goal. Yeah, I would probably think of other things, but I'll leave some room to Shane as well.
Because we have talked about the idea of within a team innovating to essentially try to remain relevant, I guess. And I think that's actually really, really important. But I think that perhaps it might help the listeners to actually understand the competition that they're actually up against. One of the things that I learned along the way of doing that last transformation project was about automation. I've been involved in automation of IT for quite some time, but even I didn't know just how far this had come. There was an example, I went to a conference, there were banks and insurance companies and things there. And they were talking about how a lot of their IT systems are so antiquated that there's a huge amount of risk associated with trying to change those and trying to innovate around those to get new products in order to mitigate that risk, because they don't bother changing these things now. So they've got these old COBOL systems and AS400s and everything else. And they just automate the process of putting the data into those. Now, at the moment, they're doing that with people. So they have data entry operators that will take the data from a website and they'll key it into the 4 or 5 different systems they've got. And I saw a YouTube example, it's probably not on the public YouTube, of a side-by-side comparison of one of the data entry operators doing the work for this company compared to their automation system. And their automation system was a $100,000 package of software, buys them 5 licenses. So they've essentially got 5 robots working 23 hours a day. You've got to give them an hour off so you can do backups. $100,000, $20,000 a pop. In about 57 seconds, I think it was, what it took the operator 11 minutes to do. If you think about the kinds of speed increases and the cost savings you're going to get by being able to replace quite a lot of people with a single software robot, then people in jobs now have got to be very innovative in order to try and compete with that. And it gets worse because these robots were simply doing the manual work that a human was doing. They were just logging into these systems, keying the data in, copying it across between different systems. But these organizations are also trying the artificial intelligence that's built into these systems to see whether or not the software could make the decisions that a human would make when analyzing the information. So if you think about things like approving home loans, making decisions around whether to invest or not. And these robots apparently the AI was actually pretty good. They were pretty close to switching it on. That is going to dramatically alter the landscape for workers in a whole variety of organizations. And I sit now with accountants. I've got emails coming in from my accountants now telling me, hey, look, stick your accounts into this particular software package and we'll give you a fixed price deal for creating your annual accounts. Yeah, because essentially they'll just automate it. And that's going to be the big next thing that people in businesses are going to need to be worried about and to be thinking about. How do you compete with that? How do you remain relevant in the face of that kind of technology and innovation?
The thing that you said, it stuck with me this whole time, was even robots need a break. That 1 hour a day so that the backup can be made. That actually made me smile because I'm like, okay, first of all, truth. There's some truth in that. We all need a break, even robots. The rest of what you're saying is really true. A lot of what we do can be automated. And it makes me think of, for example, my family lawyer, when we were working with some legal structure stuff we wanted within our family, she was talking to me about how what we were doing used to be inaccessible to people at our middle class income level because of the amount of people that were necessary to do the job. And it was just too expensive to get done what needed to get done. And here it was a fraction of the cost to get everything set up the same way as it used to, because of the amount of things that are now the same, can be repeatable, whether it's approved legal language and not needing as many people. I think that's a huge part of it. And this concept of, does adding value actually equal relevance?
I think it does, but I think it depends on product and service. Yeah, if it's a commodity, right, then what's driving that disruption is competition. We'll talk about corporate greed, but I think that's overly simplistic. Corporate greed is really actually a combination of my personal greed, your personal greed, the fact that we want higher salaries when we're in a job, we want to pay less money for something which we can get down the street. It's no different than anything else. So all of that is driving businesses to think about how to get stuff at the lowest cost. And for those kinds of products and services, then automation is the way, right? You're going to strip the people out because they are the expensive part of most things, and strip that back to the bare bones. So where innovation and those things come into play is for some of those sort of unique products. If you're in a sector or a business where you're creating something which is unique, it's not a commodity. Adding value is something that's really, really useful. That's where the human potential comes in to be able to say, well, actually, a robot can't do this. This is something that's got to be created by people thinking about other customers or doing whatever it is.
Palma, what would you add?
Adding value is quite relevant. I saw that in the headhunting industry in a certain way where I was involved with, where through, let's say, LinkedIn and a lot of these online platforms, all of a sudden the bulge bracket recruitment was taken over by machine or in-house teams because they could be using the online resources. And some of that nowadays is even automated. So the way for the headhunting firms then to make money was, on the one hand, to really focus on the really senior stuff which needed a human element, because some things still need a human element, and also to come up with new additional services. And they were much more around value creation in terms of being a much broader talent organization. So that was one of the changes that I had seen. I think generally as humans, what makes us different is the ability to create, to think more strategically rather than just the analysis, the automation, the quick fix. So anything that's more qualitative, probably more long-term. And I think probably, and again, it's the mindfulness teacher speaking and sort of the type of people I meet, but the more we automate everything and the more time we spend with our gadgets, the more there's craving for, in some ways, personalized, human-to-human interactions, high-end services, which I'm not sure if they can be taken over by a robot. Maybe once we all live in VR and never take our glasses off and never step out of this world, maybe then. But I think that's still a long way to go.
Interesting. I think that the pendulum, at least as far as our experience with technology and how we experience the world, is changing. And so it's going to be interesting to see how our automation systems will change to go with it. Because at one point in time, if you had a website, it didn't have to be good, didn't have to be easy to navigate. It could be very slow to load. All of those things right now would get somebody, you come to the website, they're going to turn around, they're going to go find someplace else because there's so many other options. There's so many other creative ideas out there. Now let's think about someplace like a Twitter or an Amazon or things like that. It's really hard to get an actual person to talk to. They've gotten all of this stuff that they're like, we don't want to talk to people about this stuff. So here's where you're going to go. And if not, you can send an email and we may or may not answer you. And that's actually also now coming to what I would consider a little bit of a close. It doesn't matter if it's with a robot or a person. We expect a connection to be heard and have our problem solved. We could say the same thing about, like, for example, value versus features, I think. One of the things that as more and more people enter an industry, and we can use e-commerce as an example of that, because it is now a commodity. When online commerce, being able to pay for things on the internet first came out, there weren't very many companies that did it. And if you did it well, and if you were very specialized, you could make an amazing profit. And now it's way down there. You might make 0.5% being a middleman after you get the credit card fees and this other stuff. So what do you end up competing on? The market that has been chosen to be entered is the competition is so fierce, it's only on price. And so that's another thing. We think about automation, but we also have to think about this concept of features. And if we're only focused on features and not solving the problem of why we exist as a company in the first place, we miss out on the opportunity to grow and change with our customers. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Apple and Microsoft have got that 0.5% sort of. They get 30% of what goes through their stores.
So does Apple. But I'm thinking about, like, credit card transactions, right? When I started, we were charging 20%. And now you can go get a credit card processor, even a middleman, and you're charged 4 or less. It's a big difference. So it depends. So it depends on how you're doing it. Are you doing it to have the function of being the credit card processor, or are you doing it as a function and a value of getting to my platform? Their whole reason of getting that much is because they have the audience, and people will pay for the audience. So again, I think it's in a monetization piece and how we're looking at it and positioning it. So I hear what you're saying, Shane.
There's one thing I'd like to share, jumping on you mentioning e-commerce. Because on the one hand, let's say if we take something like more high-end fashion, for example, yes, all of them are now making probably a lot of their sales online. Some of the designers even cut down significantly on their shop presence. But at the same time, what they're now creating is experiences for customers. And these experiences really depend on the human interaction. And these experiences are not happening online. These experiences are happening in their shops. So in some ways, while their online presence is much more important for sales, they're creating kind of almost little palaces on the high street or on these high-end shopping streets to create experiences for their customers. And I think in some ways, if you look at an Apple store is also much more than a store where people buy stuff. It's much more of a place for connection, for getting excited about the product, for doing all sorts of workshops, for networking. So I think for building brand identity in those things, it's not just about online. I think it's important to sort of see the broader picture, not just where someone sells and what kind of margins they make in this particular outlet, but rather seeing, okay, what is it actually that makes a brand's value grow? Because that's so much more than their sales.
It's a really interesting point you've raised. I went out to a garden centre at the weekend. I don't normally go out shopping. It's not something I do a lot of. But what I did notice, and I have started to notice actually, is that a lot of these stores that you'd think are, hardware stores, things like that, they've got coffee bars in them. And she's sitting down having lunch, and I'm thinking, why on earth would you go to a hardware store to have lunch? And, or a garden centre to have lunch? These places look like they're doing a roaring trade. It must be part of this experience thing. And it is something, to be honest, I don't understand it. It's beyond my comprehension. It is obviously working for them. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, a lot of their profit comes from these coffee bars and things, because there must be a fair margin in that, I would have thought.
I love that you brought that up, because that's where this pendulum's swinging back. It's the creativeness. And I think computers can come up with some pretty good ideas sometimes, yet how it's going to work and what a person's reaction is going to be, at least still today, comes from other people. And so being able to balance that and figure those things out is very neat. And we're going to end with this next piece. This is the part of the show where we talk about being bold, and leaders in business owners, department heads, it doesn't matter. The people part doesn't matter. What matters is that we have this need to be bold here. We know if we're not in the middle of disruption, it's coming. It could be coming within our company. It could be coming within our industry. It could be coming from any other part of innovation that we don't even recognize today as playing a part and impacting what we do and the work that we do. What is the skill that you think is really important to have as a leader in business today to handle disruption?
I think being bold is about taking risks. So it's about becoming prepared to actually stick your neck on the line and say, look, this is something that's changing in our environment, and I think this is something that we need to address. And here's an idea that my team come up with to try and do that. Can we do this? And can we actually try to move the business in this different direction in order to address this need? And that's a bold step. A lot of managers get comfortable. You're getting good salary. Why would you stick your neck on the line and risk making a mistake and risk failing and maybe not getting your performance review and things like that? That's complacency. And that's where you're going to get replaced. My suggestion to the thing you want to be doing, which is bold, is start taking some risks. Calculated risks, obviously, but start taking some risks.
And that resilience also comes, I think, with questioning things, really questioning all the things we have always done. That's obviously a killer phrase in a business when we want to try to do something different, but we just assume it can't be changed because it has worked for us for eons of years and we've always done it that way. So I think really questioning all our processes in a business, questioning who our competitors are, questioning our own assumptions about our own abilities, about our team, about our company's position, just question everything. And the other thing I'd like to add is I'd call it adaptive leadership skills and learning agility. So really getting those skills that allow us to do things differently than we have done before. Because in times of disruptions or change, we cannot react to what we think is here, could be here, should be here, or was here yesterday, but we have to really strategically respond to what really is here. And that requires sort of mental training as well.
You will find all of the program notes for today's show at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P64. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 64. You can also search for disruption. You've learned all kinds of things, that we need dreamers, that there are things that are unpopular because we naturally resist, that we're looking for new markets, that we want to add value, and what makes it bold, and how to be a bold leader when we're facing disruption each day. And it's only through all of our stories and all of our experiences that we shape what it means to be a leader right now in today's market, in today's world, and set the stage for what comes next. So join this conversation and share with us your thoughtful exploration and interaction on how we can embrace disruption.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.